Oh, we're in page 4. It's okay. Hence, when Villay, now I come to another book written by Estherine Kire. When Villay in Estherine Kire's book, When the River Sleeps, which was published in 2014, sets out on his journeys, you find that seers, these are shamanistic seers, empower him with foreknowledge and a sense of mission. Sometimes accompanying Villay, shamanistic figures help him face antagonists from the spirit world. In their respective representations, these writers depict the shaman or the seer as a powerful wielder of the spoken word. It is a tool that can dispel darkness, harvest the positive energies of the human spirit, and generally keep the aura of an individual or community alive. The word aura may be translated into the Khasi term ringeo. Now look at the connection between the different communities, which has been thus explained. The ringeo, I think all Khasis will understand this, is a numinous extension of personality, a lighted area that encircles an individual and spells out personality in several complex layers. Nourished by an inherent genius, which is also the racial intelligence, it is an unself-conscious recognition of one's multiple strengths. This in itself produces positive waves that communicate themselves to others in multifarious and intangible ways. The Ringeo speaks of an inner force that is difficult to conceal. In maturity, it is almost tangible and is a natural protection against all negative influences. Even a child may possess a strong Ringeo or be a Ringeo and therefore prove able to withstand the suppressive forces that may threaten him or her. Giving a child a name is the first step towards empowering its Ringeo. And so we go back to Nagaland. Villay's Ringeo receives impetuses from the seers who guide him, but most importantly, his Ringeo is kept alive because of his inadvertent connection with the forest. The forest is my wife, he says. On his own admission at the start of his journey, he foregrounds the forest and allows it to take precedence over him. So, in the book When the River Sleeps, it is actually the forest that is the main character, the protagonist of the book. Its fostering spirit and positive energy suffuses the journeys of Villay, whose relationship with it comes full circle when the white tiger springs out of the forest to kill the person who kills him, to kill his assassin. Leaping out of the forest, the red tiger pounds on its prey and iron claws ripped into helpless skin. The death of Villay can never be the climax of an oral-based narrative that has a series of climaxes with every encounter. Now what I mean when I say this is that when you read books from the West, you find that there is always one climax. But if you read these stories, the Legends of Pensam, when the River Sleeps, Speaks the River Umkra, many other books, you find that there are very small climaxes. And we are dealing with stories, stories that talk about personal encounters with the spirit world. Encounters that end at one point and start again at another point. These encounters take him into the undefined worlds of spirits that spans parallel worlds and breaches chronological time. Now I leave out the next paragraph. I go on to the next paragraph after that. The Black Hill, another book published in 2014, is another book that is redolent with histories being retold. I would like to clarify upon this statement by explaining that in our oral communities, there is no one given history. Because the oral tradition is unstructured, histories told by different tellers may vary from each other and sometimes overlap. And in the case of the Black Hill, there are many versions of history told from different perspectives, as for example, that of the local and the colonial, the indigenous and the foreign, the hidden, the obvious and the accepted. Contemporary women writers around the world rewrite the past in their own terms, taking on the role of historiographers. Now the role of the woman as the historiographer is something that seems to have taken a very important role amongst women writers in Northeast India. In the novel, Dai is a historiographer eliciting an intersection of multiple worldviews, the literate, the native, the colonial, the pre-colonial, that has been the cause of much conflict and dilemma in these hills. The book brings to life the indigenous history of Arunachal Pradesh in the mid-19th century and its encounter with the outside world through Father Crick. In the unraveling of the story, she attempts to do justice both to the sources that she had archived, that she had accessed in France, and to the oral stories that exist in the recesses of memory. So you find that histories, many histories take place in this book. Many histories are being told, retold in this book. Someone is speaking to me from the past, and the words are clear as day. A man, a woman, and a priest. This is their story. So the book is about a man, a woman, indigenous, gendered, Arunachal, local, and a priest. Foreign ways, colonial. In the course of interrogating known history, she gives voice to Kajinsha and Gimur and weaves her representations around them as well as around the agency of the colonizer. The warp and weft of the book is in the undergrowth of the forest, which is the playing field of her characters. And it is amidst these surroundings that the significance, the next point that I want to point out here, that the significance of the dreamscape emerges. The characters are either warned or given a premonition of the future through dreams. Dreams play a very important part in many of the narratives from here. The prevalence of the dreamscape comes from a belief system that recognizes no tangible boundaries between the physical and the supernatural, and the interweaving of fact and fictional truth knits the story into a local one, but the issues within the book remain common to other communities whose voices were choked in the coming of the new ways. With the initiation into the new medium called writing in the 19th century, these communities, in the words of Temsula Ao, were perforce made to write orality as the only way to preserve what they still had. They handled the challenge in their own ways, as all local histories will tell us. Unsurprisingly, memory, which has always been the prime mover in the oral tradition, now takes on an even greater role, that of strategizing remembrances of things past. So when Temsula Ao writes about the nowhere boatman or a tiger woman's prayer, she teases out bit by bit the buried strands of the oral from the collective memory of a people to write in a past that has been deliberately erased or inadvertently forgotten. These stories circulate within the psyche of writers who take on an oracular role. They become the oracles of their communities, a role that attempts to fill in the gaps in the retracted memories of their people by scouring the past, contemporizing stories in a manner that would upgrade a community's sense of self in order to, quote-unquote, master the art of witness to all realities that have to give way to new ones or to join forces with the new ones. In the history of many of the states in Northeast India, beginning with Nagaland, these were not the only considerations that demanded attention. Birendra Kumar Bhattacharya, a writer from Assam, who was also the Vice-Chancellor of Guwahati University, has rendered a very human account of the story of Nagaland in his book, Love in the Time of Insurgency. The translation, the English translation, was done in 2005, but it was brought out sometime in the 1960s. And insurgency it was that began to take hold of the lived life in most of the states. These hills called home, 2006, by Temsula Ao, Who the Cap Fits, 2007 by R.G. Lingdor, and narratives of conflict and unrest in Nagaland and Meghalaya. And in the book, Anthology of Contemporary Poetry from the Northeast, the two editors, K.S. Nonkanri and Robin Singamon, preface the volume with words that cast the region in a grey area of uncertainty. Although a great cultural cauldron, the northeast of India remains little known and largely misunderstood. The uneasy coexistence of paradoxical worlds, such as the folk and the westernized, virgin forests and car-choked streets, ethnic cleansers and the parasites of democracy, ancestral values and flagrant corruption, resurgent nativism, and the sensitive outsider's predicament makes this picturesque region especially vulnerable to tragedy. The anthology, the first of its kind, is an overview of the contradictory nature of life in the region, where the sound of the gun exists side by side with the oral stories that look back to a pristine past, and where corruption and moral decay has been the order of the day. Even though translations are not within the purview of this paper, I would like to quote from some. Award-winning poet Chandra Kanta Mura Singh from Tripura describes the corrupt minister as having, I think we are all familiar with the corrupt minister when we look at the television. He describes the corrupt minister as having neither inside nor outside. He has so much to say and never suffers from pent-up words. You know, he has verbal diarrhea all the time. From his poem, Of a Minister, which is a translation from Kokborok, Nini Lungalang, who did his schooling in Shillong, describes the senselessness of the killings in Nagaland in a poem, Dust. I saw a young man gunned down as I shopped in the marketplace, 2 thick thuds, and then he fell and thrashed a bit on his face. It's very painful. Cherry El Champe from Mizoram talks about identity in a poem, What Does an Indian Look Like? You look at me and you see my eyes, my skin, my language, my faith. What does an Indian look like? An Indian looks like me, an Indian is me. Amidst this diatribe is Kimpham S. Nongkenri's poem Ren, which sings of Ren the Nongchuri fisherman, Ren the beloved of a river nymph, Ren who loved so madly, who left his mother and his home to live in magic depths. So you know this coexistence of the past and the present. And then from Robin Singh Nangom's native land, which is Manipur, comes the scream of the dying in a bad dream, then the radio report, and a newspaper, 6 shot dead, 25 houses razed, 16 beheaded with hands tied behind their backs inside a church. Lastly, I would like to mention Megan Kachari's book of poems, Melodies and Poems. Now, Megan Kachari is a pseudonym for Mithinga Daimari, who was the publicity secretary of the Ulfa. And he wrote poems when he was in jail. His poems are remarkable for their sensitivity to the human condition. The above sampling corroborates the complex direction that literature from Northeast India is taking. There is a ubiquitous sense of unease, but also an unwavering faith in new beginnings for the ethnic communities struggling to articulate identity and make sense of what history has done to them. Of the 635 communities listed as tribal, more than 200 are found in the Northeast. Of the 325 languages listed by the People of India project, 175 belonging to the Tibeto-Burman group are spoken in the Northeast. This is a quote from Bhomik. The above statistics only serve to underscore the diverse sensibilities of communities who share migration stories, creation and origin myths, or a lost script that was either eaten up by a dog, or in the case of the Khasi, swallowed up by the messenger who had to cross a flooded river when he went to receive it from God. They also endured ruptures and breaks in the evolution of their past and suffered the forced silences of small nations who have merely gone underground in their struggle to be heard. Each narrative, each poem, every bit of writing has been an act of motivated resistance against the forces that be. The stories that emerge locate the Pensam space within the heart of the human imaginary. Now, before I conclude, I'd like to refer to another writer from Assam. I would like at this point to turn to a translated text from Assam, a play entitled The Wolf Boy, written by Arun Sharma. He's a very famous playwright in Assamese. The story follows the life of the so-called wolf boy who was rescued from the wolves of the forest when he was very young. The wolf boy, now called Romu, became Dr. Chaudhry's protege. In the course of an excellent tutelage under Dr. Chaudhry, he succeeds in obtaining a science scholarship to study abroad at a prestigious university. However, this prized achievement is denied him when the results are falsified and the scholarship given to the son of a local politician, an average student who happens to be an aspirant in marriage to Dr. Chaudhry's daughter. Later in the day, when Dr. Chaudhry comes to his lab, he finds it completely destroyed, and Romu on the table with a stone implement in his mouth. Now, this is the object that had been confiscated from him many years ago, All this while, it lay encased in a glass cabinet. Now, the point that I wish to make here is that Romu's reversal may very well be the story of ethnic communities all over the planet. Under stressful conditions, Romu's identity becomes fractured, and the initial reaction is to revert to a past that used to be familiar to him. However, the image of Romu jumping about on top of the table in the house of a middle-class professor who had once tried to adopt and educate him is disturbing, for it brings in issues of the insider-outsider dichotomy and questions the very notion of identity, that after years of mentoring Romu, society cannot accept him. The stone implement is symbolic. It is the unfiltered resource located within the material universe, the speaking universe, as it were, raw in energy and spirit. The ironic twist to Romu's fate opens up a well of possibilities in the image of the stone as an implement of power. Does Romu know this? The question goes further than the book itself, but it may be said that the stone is the symbolic icon taken from the speaking universe, and it is the writer from these parts, it is the writer from Northeast India who has attempted to generate the narrativizing potential of the stone despite all probabilities. And on this note, I would like to end with an acknowledgement to John Roberts. Of course, we've heard what the Reverend Dr. B.L. Nongri has told us, but I would like to just reiterate what he says. I would like to end with an acknowledgement to John Roberts, who has been called the father of Khasi literature, and who is the reason why we are gathered here today, not merely to remember him as the founder of this theological college, but as someone who immersed himself in the act of translation. We all know his valuable contribution towards translation and publishing the Bible in Khasi, his attempts to translate parts of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, 23 chapters of the Old Testament Bible, and a translation of about 40 hymns. I think you must be knowing that better. Also, his efforts to create a written literature for the Khasi cannot in any way be overlooked. He succeeded in creating an environment for learning and a writing ethos, which is very important, that would later be taken up by our own Khasi writers. His untiring efforts to involve himself in the work of translation is of special significance to us today, when we too have to take up the responsibility of transcribing and translating our oral foundations and realities, not only to future generations, but also to ourselves as we try to make sense of our history. He attempted to bridge the language gap through his translation efforts, which was kept up at a steady pace throughout his working career. Despite his Christian affiliations, he seemed to have a vision of a creative writing society for the Khasis, which of course was important for the Khasi convert in order to be able to read the Bible. He had to teach them to read and write, but he also had a greater vision for Khasi society, which was why he instilled so much interest in the Khasi Power. The active translating self of John Roberts translates itself into new forms and newer acts of perception as the spirit of translation and transcription percolates down to our writings in Meghalaya today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Esther Syiem, for a very grandiose presentation. According to my observation, the presentation has highlighted much on many important themes, ideas, thoughts, concepts that convey to us the meaning of the reality of Northeast India, where different tribes settle in different regions of Northeast India with varied philosophies and culture. I hope we have been enlightened by the presentation, and I believe that the presentation has been and will remain a great contribution as a source of information on that very reality. It will contribute to the further and better genius of the institution and also of our knowledge of all of us. Once again, thank you very much, Prof. Syiem, for the very grandiose and meaningful presentation. Now we shall come to another part of our program, and I will call upon Okay, we shall have sometimes for questions. If you have any questions to ask, or any you would like to make any comments on the presentation, I will give time to you to kindly do that, and I will request Professor Syiem to kindly respond. If anybody, kindly feel free and stand from your seat and say or give me a line, please. Anybody?
First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to our professor here, yes, for the information that she has given to us through this lecture. I'm so deeply grateful to the principal for inviting me to the Syiem College here. I'm now a layman actually, but when I listened to the lecture of Professor Esther Syiem, it reminds me of my old days. Now, I expect that some of the invitees, not only the professors here, lecturers, but others, members of the governing board, will be able to be here and listen to the lecture. It's very informative to all of us. Now, particularly to myself, thank you so much once again, Council, for this informative lectures you have given to us. To me, I recollect when I listened to the lecture, I could not see the writing there because I prefer to be in the back seat, but the principal called me to go. But it is a disadvantage for me to follow it. But thank you so much once again for this. There are three terms that Syiem strikes my mind through her lecture. One is imagination, and the second one is renew, and the third one is universe. Now history may be reading today what we call the contemporary world to the what we call the Stone Age. I began to study the history from the Stone Age to the contemporary world. But the lecture we have listened, Voices of Resistance, Literature in English from Northeast India. I thought this is very important for us, particularly for you, professors, and the young readers, men and women here when they listen to this lecture. Now, this is a lecture to the tribal community, to the people in Northeast India. The resistance is not only the gun. Resistance with the gun, I think it's very easy. With the modern technology, sophisticated weapons, we can't shoot someone. But this lecture gives to me a very great impression, and it reminds me of these three things. Now, it is not to criticize our beloved missionaries. They came here with a good intention, but we are benefited through these hard works and their penetration to our culture. And we are happy that we are from there because of the hard work. The summary exists because of the hard work of John Roberts, the founding principle of the G1887. Now, when I listen carefully to the lecture, there is one problem that we have to tackle today through this lecture. You see, through the lecture, people listen carefully. Our forefathers, we have not seen them, but through this lecture, I could see that their worldview, the imagination of this, our great-great-grandfather through the literature that has been narrated to us, I imagine they are much more creative than the modern scholar. This lecture tells us that our tribal forefathers are more creative than the modern sophisticated scholar. Their imagination, you see, is so creative, and they are concerned also for the universe, the imagination. They encounter with the universe that the imagination does not end here. But when our missionary came here, they gave us another narrative. The narrative, our missionary tells us that the most important matter that we have to think upon is only God, man and God. Till today, our theology teaches the main concern is man and God. But he forgot to tell us about universe. I do believe that you agree, all the theological professors here, you agree with me, because when I listened to this one, I thought that the theology that I have studied, I have not yet reinvented, reimagined the theology of my great-great-great-grandfather. The literature here tells us that they are more creative before Christianity came to us. It is very blunt criticism. It's not. It is because their context in the West. Now, when Thomas Jones came here, he saw, he experienced that. Then he resisted against the British regime because they exploit the nature for the material benefit. The Thomas Jones, John Roberts, through their imagination and thinking, you see that Catholic theology it does not begins with man or with God. It begins three layers. Man, God, and universe. This universe. Therefore, in Catholic we call it Main Ram El. Ram El, I have not mentioned that term. Ram El, I do believe it is the depth of down the sun. There are mysteries. That's what we call it Main Ram. Therefore, through this lecture, I'm benefiting. But come, I want to not to ask, but to seek clarification from you. Through this literature, can we learn also that the Catholic theology has to be reinvented so that the contemporary world, who is mad with the material world, is there any contribution that the Catholic theology, Catholic thought, Catholic belief system may contribute to better world that we be able to live a meaningful life here and to eternity. That is what I want to see, because I have heard and have studied deeply this literature, and I would like to see out of this lecture, this theological college here will be able to reinvent that what I see in your lecture today, that Catholic theology tangible system, will be able to make our own society a better place to live, and that the world will learn to us that the material world also is a spiritual world, as the Kasi people could analyze it. And I do believe that with this lecture, if we can come to that conclusion, I think it's very good for us to know that we'll leave this with this young men, young women will be able to contribute theoretically to our stuff. Thank you so much, Madam, once again. Yes.